Friends, hello. Today, I'm not only your history teacher, but also, in a sense, a medical orderly. What are we going to talk about? We are living through something that several generations are experiencing for the first time: a global pandemic, a universal quarantine, call it what you like. And today, we'll discuss the great epidemics of the past, where they came from, how people fought them, and most importantly, how societies changed afterward. Let's note right away, humanity has probably endured several pandemics that left no written trace, we simply have no sources. But there are also official, well-documented ones. The first is the so-called Plague of Justinian, named after the Byzantine Emperor Justinian I. It broke out in Egypt in 541 CE and, carried by merchants and goods, spread across the Mediterranean and began to kill. What came before it? A scene straight out of a bad disaster film, one natural catastrophe after another. First a volcanic eruption, then unusually low solar activity. Contemporaries said the sun shone without rays, like the moon. Less warmth meant cold, cold meant poor harvests meant famine. Shortly before the plague, the same regions suffered from leprosy and smallpox. And then came the plague. What was especially terrifying about it? Contemporary descriptions speak of the vulnerability of the young and the staggering speed of death. A strong young man, freshly arrived from the road, would suddenly start shivering with fever and quickly die. Procopius of Caesarea wrote that some in perfect health fell suddenly, as if struck by lightning, others developed chills, fever, delirium, paralysis. Black spots or bloody vomiting were almost sure signs of death. In the milder form, known as bubonic plague, swollen lymph nodes, buboes, appeared in the groin, underarms, or behind the ears. They might turn gangrenous and kill the victim, or fester and sometimes heal. Procopius also noted complications, damage to the tongue, leaving survivors unable to speak. In Constantinople, the bubonic form dominated. There was no medicine in our sense of the word. The emperor had no idea what to do, neither did the doctors. There was no talk of isolation. Servants and physicians caring for the sick sometimes didn't catch the disease, so it wasn't always spread by touch. People were completely bewildered. How was it transmitted? They fled to country estates and still got sick. Today we know the pathogen was carried by fleas on rodents. Social reaction? Procopius wrote that Byzantium was struck by calamities one after another. Some blamed the malice of an evil spirit near the emperor, others said God had turned his face away from the Roman Empire. In other words, supernatural causes. The sky looked strange, the earth suffered famine, drought, earthquakes, eruptions, migrations, and amid all that, infection spread with terrifying ease. Modern estimates suggest the Justinian plague reached as far as Ireland. Burial was chaotic. Family tombs overflowed, gravediggers died, bodies lay in homes and streets. The state? Almost inactive. There were no travel bans, no quarantines, the disease raged freely. Death toll estimates range from 50 to 100 million, most historians say around 50 million. In 542, thousands were dying daily in Constantinople. The consequences for Byzantium were devastating. The capital lost up to 40% of its people. The eastern provinces were depopulated. The weakened empire opened the door to Arab conquests, losing up to a third of its territory and its global dominance. The Arabs gained access to Byzantine libraries and medical texts and became the new custodians of science. The economy staggered, grain, the oil of that era, soared in price during bad harvests, then crashed when no one was left to eat it. The Black Death. The second Great Plague pandemic, the Black Death, lasted from 1346 to 1353, 7 long years. We count our quarantine in months, they counted theirs in years. What came before it? In Asia, droughts, locusts, typhoons. In Europe, cooling, drought, and the Great Famine, 1312 to 1322, sometimes extended to 1325. Add wars, the 100 Years' War, civil strife in Italy and Spain, the Golden Horde threatening the East. Refugees, starving, homeless, unemployed, became perfect bridges for infection. Malnutrition weakened immunity. Cities were overcrowded and filthy, people threw waste into the street, garbage wasn't collected. In Paris, before dumping slops, one was at least supposed to shout "Watch out!" Personal hygiene was nearly non-existent. Houses stood wall to wall, streets were narrow, walls high, perfect breeding grounds for disease. Where did it start? In the 1320s, in the Gobi Desert. Marmots, a local delicacy, came closer to human settlements during famine. Humans caught the infection, and it traveled along the Silk Road with merchants and Mongol armies. China was hit first, then India. Japan and Korea initially escaped. Japan closed its ports and sent medical envoys to observe in China, barely avoiding contagion. Europe joked until Genoese merchants brought the plague by ship, along with rats and fleas. There's even a bioweapon theory. During the siege of Kaffa, modern Feodosia, Khan Janibek, whose camp was ravaged by plague, catapulted corpses over the city walls. The Genoese were infected, fled by sea, and carried the disease to Europe. By 1347, Constantinople was struck. Outwardly healthy people burned up with fever and died within a day or two. Half, or even up to 90%, of city dwellers perished. Refugees and traders spread it to Persia, Syria, and Palestine. In Egypt, ships arrived with a handful of survivors who died within days. The Sahara formed a natural barrier. Fleas and rats couldn't cross the desert. Sicily's Messina fell in 4 days. Refugees fled to Catania, the gates were closed, stones thrown in vain, almost all perished. The plague swept through ports, autumn 1347 Marseille, December Genoa, 1348 Venice, then Avignon, Majorca, Pisa, Florence. During the plague, Boccaccio wrote the Decameron about Florentines fleeing to a villa to tell stories. In Spain, it struck Barcelona, killing royalty. King Alfonso XI of Castile and Queen Eleanor of Aragon, proof that rank offered no protection. In France, Bordeaux, Rouen, Normandy, no coffins, no one to bury. A comet shone over Paris, a bad omen, and within weeks the city was decimated. In England, Bristol, Southampton, then London. King Edward III claimed Brs Gather. By 134, to Ireland, then Scan, Denmark, Sweden, Norway. Jews were blamed, leading to pogroms and mass suicides to avoid torture and forced baptism. Finland was spared, perhaps by distance or luck. 1352 Pskov, 1353 Moscow, Prince Simeon the Proud died with his sons. Beyond that, the wave burned out. How was it treated? Practically not at all. Spread by fleas, by clothes, by corpses. Heat slowed it, boiling water killed it, but was scarce. Incubation lasted hours to 9 days, mortality reached 98%. Doctors lanced buboes, cauterized, used leeches, dried toads, incense, garlic, vinegar, and advised, run far, run fast. The plague doctor emerged, by the 17th century fully described by Charles Delorme: leather outfit, hat, gloves, and the iconic beaked mask stuffed with herbs to purify the air. It offered little real protection, doctors died by the dozens, but it was a forerunner of respirators and gas masks. People's remedies, amulets, spells, vinegar cloths, royal touch, bowls of milk to draw out miasma, goats kept indoors, the smellier, the better, supposedly protective. And of course, the search for culprits, lepers, foreigners, Jews, physicians, all persecuted, which only spread the plague further. Governments were mostly helpless, but there was one clever exception: Venice. It divided the city into zones, banned mass gatherings, limited funeral processions, capped prices on essentials, aided the poor, imposed a 40-day quarantine on ships, hence the word quarantina, and set up a plague island hospital with its own cemetery. Death tolls still reached 30 to 40%, but the system became a model for Europe. Total losses, 30 to 50% of Europe's population, a catastrophe. Yet humanity recovered. Labor shortages drove up wages, mechanization grew, feudalism cracked, and a middle class was born. Faith in the church weakened, economic power shifted. In Russia, ironically, the plague weakened the Golden Horde, paving the way for Dmitry Donskoy's victory at Kulikovo in 1380. The plague returned for centuries, every 15 to 25 years, with major flare-ups: 1629, Lyon; 1665, London; 1679, Vienna; 1720, Marseille; 1771, Moscow. London, 1665. A classic nightmare. Doors were marked with red crosses and the words "Lord have mercy on us." Bodies were collected at night, bells tolled, corpses stacked in layers, up to 5 deep. Children were laid at adults' feet to save space. Cats and dogs were slaughtered as carriers, leaving rats unopposed. Samuel Pepys wrote, "The city is empty, all talk is who died and who was sick." A year later, the Great Fire swept through tragedy, but it burned the rats and the plague with them. Moscow, 1771, the Plague Riot. A case where hysteria proved deadlier than disease. The plague arrived via troops returning from the Ottoman War and along trade routes, silk, wool. In the military hospital, 20 of 27 patients died within a week. Officials fled, the rich escaped to estates, the poor stayed among corpses. Collectors called mortuses roamed the streets and waxed leather suits with eye slits and long hooks to haul out bodies to mass graves. When even they died off, convicts were released to replace them. At the Varvarsky Gate hung the revered Bogolyubskaya icon. Crowds gathered around it, insisting that the icon is offended and that God will punish if prayers stopped. Archbishop Ambrosy, fearing contagion, moved the icon indoors and sealed the donations. The mob accused him of robbing the Virgin, rang the alarm bells, and stormed the Kremlin. Negotiations failed, General Eropkin ordered troops to fire. Riots continued, nobles' houses burned, hospitals looted, and Ambrosy was found and killed in the Donskoy Monastery. Empress Catherine II sent Count Grigory Orlov to restore order. Acting like a crisis manager, he divided Moscow into 27 districts with supervisors, banned urban funerals, moved cemeteries outside city limits, ordered disinfection of homes and belongings, personally inspected hospitals, and gave people paid work building the Kamerkalasky rampart to prevent looting. Within weeks, deaths dropped from thousands to hundreds. Around 50,000 to 100,000 perished, but the epidemic barely spread beyond Moscow. The city was saved by management.